I found my daughter at a rest stop off I-64 in Virginia, sitting on a concrete bench outside the women's restroom with her coat pulled tight around her stomach. She was 7 months pregnant. It was the 3rd week of March, and the temperature that night had dropped to 28 degrees. She had her phone in both hands, but the screen was dark. The battery had died sometime in the 2 hours she'd been sitting there alone. She looked up when she heard my truck door. She didn't cry. She just said, "Dad." That was all. My name is Robert Calloway. I'm 58 years old. I worked 31 years as a licensed electrician in the Shenandoah Valley, mostly commercial construction, schools, warehouses, a few hospital expansions. I know how systems work. I know what happens when the wrong load gets put through a line that wasn't built to carry it. My daughter's name is Claire. She's 29. She manages the billing department for a pediatric clinic in Charlottesville. She is careful with money, careful with people, the kind of person who reads a document twice before she signs it. She had been engaged to a man named Trent Holloway for 6 months when that night happened. I want to be fair about how I described Trent. He wasn't the main problem. He was part of it, and that's something I had to sit with for a long time afterward. But the architect of what happened was his mother, a woman named Verna Holloway, who had spent 20 years building a property management company in the Richmond area, and who operated in every situation I ever observed her in, like a woman who kept a ledger in her head and never forgot a single entry. Claire had told me, about 3 months after the engagement, that Verna had brought up the idea of a joint investment account. The framing was warm. Family money, she said, a way to build something together as the families merged. Trent's younger brother, a man named Cole, would be the account manager, since he had a finance background. Claire had smiled and said she'd think about it. She called me that same evening. Something about it didn't feel right, she said. I told her to trust that. She did. She told Verna she wasn't comfortable combining finances before the wedding. Verna said she understood completely. The subject changed. The warmth stayed in Verna's voice. But something behind her eyes, when she looked at Claire at the next family dinner, had shifted. I saw it. Claire saw it. Neither of us said it out loud to each other for another 2 months. The trip was Verna's idea. A long weekend at the Holloway's Lake House on Smith Mountain Lake, about 2 hours southwest of Charlottesville. Verna called it a celebration trip. Claire's 2nd trimester had gone smoothly. The baby was healthy. They wanted to do something special for her before the 3rd trimester made travel more complicated. Claire was hesitant. She mentioned it to me on a Tuesday. "Trent really wants me to go," she said. "His mum has been making a real effort lately." I told her to take her phone charger, keep a location shared with me the whole time, and call me when she got there. She never called. The call I received that Friday night came from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it because I always answer numbers I don't recognize after dark. Mr. Calloway. A woman's voice. Professional. A little flat. "My name is Dene. I'm a shift supervisor at the rest stop on I-64 eastbound near Staunton. Your daughter is here. She's okay, but she asked me to call you. Her phone is dead." I was already moving before she finished the sentence. I called my brother-in-law on the way out the door. His name is Patrick Slade. He's 55, spent 22 years as a detective with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office before he retired. He and my sister Connie have been married since before Claire was born. He is not a man who panics. He is also not a man who lets things go. I told him what I knew in about 45 seconds. He said, "Go get her. I'll make some calls." It took me 1 hour and 20 minutes to reach that rest stop. I drove the whole way with my hands at 10 and 2 and the radio off. Claire was still on that bench when I got there. The shift supervisor, Dene, a heavy-set woman in her 40s with a tired face and kind eyes, had brought Claire a cup of hot water with a tea bag and draped her facility-issue emergency blanket over her shoulders. Claire looked cold. She looked exhausted. But she was steady. That's the thing about Claire. Even in the worst moments, there is a stillness in her that I have never fully understood, but have always been grateful for. I sat down next to her and put my arm around her. She leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "They left Ed. Tell me." We were about 40 minutes from the lake house. Verna said she needed to stop. Rest stop. Everyone got out. I went to the restroom. When I came out, the car was gone. I didn't say anything. I thought maybe they pulled around. There's a gas pump area on the other side. I waited. 15 minutes. Then I asked Dean if I could use the phone at the desk to try Trent's cell. She stopped. He didn't answer. "Did you try Verna?" 3 times. I kept my arm around her. The emergency blanket crinkled when she shifted. "I had maybe 6% battery left after that," she said. "I asked Dean to call you before it died." We sat there for a few more minutes. Deanne came back out to check on us and I thanked her and asked if there was somewhere warm inside. Claire could wait while I pulled the truck around. Deanne waved us both inside without a word and gave Claire another cup of hot water. I drove Claire to the Centara RMH Medical Center in Harrisonburg. The attending physician on call that night was a man named Dr. Forrest Vance, a quiet, methodical man who examined Claire with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what was at stake when a patient at 30 weeks presents with cold exposure and elevated stress markers. He told me after the examination that Claire and the baby were okay. Her core temperature had come down a few degrees, but not to a dangerous level. The baby's heart rate was normal. Then he said the thing I needed to hear stated plainly. "Mr. Barr, Calloway, in another 40 minutes in those temperatures, with her level of physical stress and her stage of pregnancy, we would be having a very different conversation. I need you to understand the margin here." I understood it. I had understood it since Dina's phone call, but hearing a doctor say it out loud does something to you. It makes it real in a way that your own fear doesn't. Trent showed up at the hospital around 11:30. He came in looking pale and agitated. And when he saw Claire in the hospital bed, he stopped in the doorway for a moment with an expression that I could not fully read. It wasn't the expression of a man who hadn't known. It was the expression of a man who had known and was now confronting the reality of what knowing had cost him. Verna Holloway was not with him. Neither was Cole. Trent looked at me and said, "Robert, I'm so sorry. It wasn't supposed to go like this." I stood up from the chair by Claire's bed. "You need to leave," I said. He opened his mouth. "Now," I said, "and don't come back here tonight." He looked at Claire. Claire was looking at the window. She didn't turn to look at him. After a moment, Trent left. Patrick arrived at 6 the next morning. He had a thermos of coffee and a folder, and he set both on the table in the waiting room and sat across from me like we were about to review blueprints for a job. He had been working since 9 o'clock the previous night. "First thing," he said. "The rest stop has cameras. I've got a contact with Virginia State Police." He pulled the footage logs as part of a preliminary inquiry I asked him to initiate. He opened the folder and laid out several printed screenshots. Verna Holloway's Suburban enters the rest area at 7:52 p.m. Claire enters the women's restroom at 7:54. The Suburban exits back onto I-64 westbound at 7:58 p.m. Claire exits the restroom at 8001. The Suburban is not in the lot. They had left her standing there before she even came out of the restroom. They hadn't waited to see her face. They had just gone. "There's more," Patrick said. He turned his phone toward me. It showed a screenshot of a text thread. He explained that his contact had obtained the thread through proper channels as part of the preliminary inquiry. The group chat was named, and I will tell you what it said at the top. Holloway family. The participants were Verna, Trent, Cole, and a name I recognized from one family dinner several months earlier. A man named Eugene Whitfield, Verna's business attorney, the man who managed the Holloway family's property trust. I read through the messages. Verna, she still won't agree to the joint account. Cole can't get the refinancing approved without it. Cole, we're running out of time. The Lakeview property payment is due in 11 weeks. Verna, The trip is this weekend. Same approach. Once she's rattled and alone, she'll either agree or Trent ends it. Either way, the liability clears. Trent, Mum. She's 7 months pregnant. Werner. She'll be fine. It's a rest stop, not the middle of nowhere. We just need her to understand she doesn't have the leverage she thinks she does. Eugene Whitfield. Werner. I want this on record that I advised against this. If something happens to the baby, there's no version of this that doesn't become criminal. Werner, nothing is going to happen. She'll be scared. She'll call someone. She'll be home by midnight. And she'll sign. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and looked at the coffee thermos for a long moment without touching it. Who owns the Lakeview property? I asked. Patrick already knew. He had been on that too. The Holloway Property Management Company had purchased a commercial building on Lakeview Drive in Richmond 3 years earlier, financed through a secondary loan structured through the Holloway Family Property Trust. The loan was in arrears. Cole had been managing the account and had missed 2 quarterly payments. The refinancing required a co-signer with liquid assets above a certain threshold. Claire had those assets. She had spent 8 years building a conservative investment portfolio, a Roth IRA, 2 index funds, a high-yield savings account. Combined, they were worth slightly more than the refinancing threshold. The joint account that Werner had described as a way to build something together as a family was a mechanism to access Claire's savings to cover a debt she had no knowledge of and no legal responsibility for. The baby she was carrying was going to be used as a reason to keep Claire tied to the family long enough for the signatures to land. I thought about every dinner I had sat through, Werner passing the salad, asking Claire about the pregnancy, talking about nursery colours and baby shower guest lists. The warmth had never been warmth. It had been inventory. Every conversation was a way of calculating what Claire was worth and how long it would take to get to it. Patrick recorded his preliminary findings with the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office that morning. He also contacted a detective he knew at the Richmond Police Department regarding the financial records. And he made a separate call to a woman named Suzette Okafor, a forensic accountant who had worked consulting cases with the county for years. Suzette had the Holloway Property Trust public financial filings reviewed by the following Tuesday. She found the missed payments on the Lakeview loan. She found 2 additional properties carrying debt that had been restructured through shell accounts to keep them off the primary company books. She found a pattern going back 4 years. She also found a name I hadn't expected. A woman named Faye Drummond, a former business partner of Cole's from a commercial property deal in Norfolk 3 years earlier. Faye had entered into a co-investment agreement with Cole, and 6 months later, Cole had introduced a revised terms document that would have transferred majority management authority over the shared property to the Holloway Trust. Faye had refused to sign. 2 weeks after that, Werner had invited Faye to a business dinner at a restaurant in Norfolk. Faye had arrived to find the dinner was actually at a private room above the restaurant, and when she went to leave, she discovered her car had been towed from the lot. Werner had called the tow company while they were inside. Faye had stood outside a closed restaurant in downtown Norfolk at 11 p.m., waiting for a ride share while Werner told her quietly in the parking lot that if he wanted the business dispute to stay quiet and out of court, they should come to an agreement. Faye had eventually signed a modified version of the terms. She had told no one because she had signed a confidentiality agreement alongside it. Patrick found her in 2 days of phone calls. She'll give a recorded statement, he told me. She said she's been hoping someone would give her a reason. I sat back in the waiting room chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Tell me about the joint account again, I said. All of it. Patrick folded his hands on the table. The Lakeview property loan balance is approximately $290,000. With penalties and missed interest, they're looking at needing around $307,000 to refinance and keep the property. Cole structured the family trust language so that a co-signer on the joint account would also carry secondary responsibility for outstanding trust liabilities. That clause was buried in the 3rd addendum of the account agreement. He paused. It wasn't an investment account. It was a liability transfer. I thought about Claire reading that document twice before signing anything. I thought about her calling me that evening and saying something didn't feel right. I thought about how close she had come to a rest stop bench in 28 degrees at 30 weeks pregnant. Claire recovered at my house for the first 2 weeks after the hospital. She slept a lot the first few days, and when she came downstairs on the 4th morning and sat across from me at the kitchen table, she looked steadier. She had her hands around a mug of decaf, and she looked out the window at the backyard, where the early April grass was starting to come in thin and green. "Was Trent in the group chat?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. "Dad?" "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. She kept looking at the yard. "He texted me when I was in the hospital." I didn't respond. He texted again the next morning. I didn't respond to that either. "I know. I want to see all of it," she said. "The whole thread." I showed her. She read it without stopping. She read it again from the beginning. When she was done, she put the phone face down on the table very carefully, the way you set something down when you don't trust yourself to set it down any other way. "Cole knew the baby was 7 months," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "And he still—" She stopped. "Okay," she said. "What are we doing?" That was the only conversation we needed to have. The criminal complaint was filed through the Albemarle County Sheriff's Office in early April. Charges included criminal conspiracy, reckless endangerment, and financial fraud related to the structure of the joint account agreement. Patrick's colleague in Richmond filed a separate financial crimes complaint regarding the Holloway Property Trust accounts. The civil case was filed 2 weeks after that. Claire's attorney, a woman named Dana Freed, who had spent 15 years in financial litigation in the Northern Virginia area, built the civil complaint around the fraudulent account agreement, the concealed trust liabilities, and the documented pattern of conduct with Faye Drummond. Werner's attorney called me personally in the 3rd week of April. His name was Stuart Fogel. He had the voice of a man who had made a career of calling people before things became expensive. He offered $95,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. I told him Claire would see them in court. There was a pause. "Then, Mr. Calloway, I would encourage you to consider the time and cost of—" "Tell Werner what I said," I said. "And tell Cole." I ended the call. In the months between spring and the trial, several things happened in succession. Cole gave an interview to a local Richmond business publication in May, in which he described the situation as a family misunderstanding that had been inflamed by outside interference. He said Claire had mischaracterized the account agreement. He said the criminal charges were a personal attack motivated by the end of a private engagement. That interview did not help him. Within 3 weeks of his publication, 2 former tenants of Holloway Property Management contacted the Richmond Police Department with accounts of lease agreement irregularities. A commercial tenant in Henrico County provided documentation showing the Holloway company had collected a security deposit on a property that was already under a separate lien, meaning the deposit was legally unrecoverable. A contractor in Chesterfield County provided records showing he had been paid with a check that bounced, then received a revised contract from Cole that contained terms he had never agreed to. By the time summer arrived, the Holloway company had lost 2 major property management contracts. Their bonding capacity was under review by the state. The lake house went on the rental market in June. The Richmond office closed in July. The trial opened on a Wednesday in September. I sat in the gallery next to Patrick for all 4 days. The prosecutor was a man named Alan Greer. He was methodical and quiet in a way that good prosecutors are when they know their evidence is clean. He opened by walking the jury through the rest stop camera footage, timestamp by timestamp. The Suburban pulling in. Claire going inside. The Suburban leaving. Claire going inside. The Suburban leaving. Claire coming out to an empty lot. Then he read the group chat messages aloud. The courtroom was very quiet while he did it. He read Werner's message. He read Cole's message. He read Eugene Whitfield's warning, and Werner's response to it. He paused after that one. Let it sit. Faye Drummond testified on the second day. She was specific and unhurried. She described the dinner in Norfolk, the tow truck, the parking lot, the quiet ultimatum. She described the confidentiality agreement she had signed because she believed at the time that Werner would follow through on every threat she had made. She said she had stayed quiet for 3 years because she had been afraid. She said she was not afraid anymore. Dr. Vance testified about Claire's condition on admission. He was precise about the medical details. He told the court what he had told me that night in the hallway. He said it plainly, and he didn't need to embellish it. The jury heard it. Suzette Okafor testified about the financial records. She walked the jury through the Lakeview property loan, the restructured debt, the shell account structure, the clause buried in the third addendum. She explained in clear terms what the joint account would have done to Claire's financial position and what it would have done to the baby's financial inheritance. Werner took the stand on the afternoon of the third day. She wore a grey blazer and an expression of careful composure. She said the trip had been meant to strengthen family bonds. She said the rest stop had been a miscommunication about timing. She said Claire had gotten out of the car before anyone realized she wasn't coming right back. Alan asked her about the group chat. She said it had been taken out of context. He asked her to explain, in plain terms, what she meant when she wrote "either way, the liability clears." She said it referred to the account situation. He asked her what liability Claire carried that needed to be cleared. She looked at her attorney. Her attorney looked at the table. She said she would need to consult her documentation. Alan handed her the documentation. She read it. The courtroom waited. She said she believed the language had been drafted more broadly than she had intended. Alan let that answer sit in the room, then he moved on. Cole testified on the fourth morning. He was polished and specific in a way that was clearly rehearsed. He said the account structure was standard property trust language. He said Eugene Whitfield had reviewed and approved it. Eugene Whitfield had already testified that he had advised against the trip and had not approved the account terms as written. That particular claim of Cole's did not survive the cross-examination. The judge presiding was a woman named Honorable Patricia Aiken. She had been on the bench in Albemarle County for 16 years. When she spoke, people listened without needing to be told to. She was in her early 60s, measured in everything she said, and she had the bearing of someone who had heard every variety of excuse that educated people used to describe choices they made deliberately. She delivered the verdict the following morning. She looked at Werner Holloway for a long moment before she spoke. I have seen many cases in which people in financial distress make choices they later describe as mistakes, she said. What I find more difficult to accept is when the choice was not made in distress or confusion, but in advance, in writing, with full knowledge of the consequences for the people in their way. The fact that you included a warning from your own attorney in your group chat and proceeded anyway does not demonstrate recklessness. It demonstrates that you understood exactly what you were doing and chose to do it. Werner received 20 months, suspended after 8 months served, with 3 years probation and a permanent restraining order keeping her from Claire and the baby. Cole received 16 months, suspended after 5 months, plus restitution tied to the financial fraud findings. Eugene Whitfield received probation and 200 hours of community service for failure to report despite prior knowledge. Trent was not charged criminally. He had not been present at the rest stop. His message in the group chat had been the only one expressing hesitation. I don't know if that makes him a good person who made catastrophically wrong choices or something harder to name. That is not mine to decide. The civil case was heard 6 weeks later. Claire was awarded $870,000 in damages. The breakdown included compensatory damages for medical expenses, emotional distress, and the fraudulent account scheme. Dana Freed had built a very clean case. The Virginia state financial regulators completed their audit of the Holloway Property Trust that fall. They confirmed the concealed debt structure, identified an additional $180,000 in misallocated trust funds, and referred the findings to the State Attorney General's office. Verna lost a property management license in November. The company was formally dissolved before Thanksgiving. The Lakeview property sold at auction in December for less than the outstanding loan balance. My granddaughter was born in late May. Claire named her June. She has Claire's dark eyes and a particular expression when she's just been fed and is looking up at you that I cannot describe without embarrassing myself, so I won't try. Claire moved back into her house in Charlottesville in the spring. She went back to work at the clinic part-time in July, full-time by August. She got a raise in September. She told me about it on the phone on a Sunday evening, and she sounded like herself. The steady, careful version of herself that had existed before any of this started, plus something I hadn't heard in her voice in a long time. She sounded light. Patrick comes to Charlottesville most Sundays now. The three of us sit around Claire's kitchen table, and June sits in her bouncer on the floor between us. And I hold a cup of coffee and watch my daughter talk to her uncle about nothing important. And I think about the rest stop bench and the emergency blanket and the dark phone screen. Trent reached out to Claire once, in June, after June was born. He asked if he could meet the baby. Claire did not respond. She told me about it a few weeks later in the way you tell someone about something you've already put away. She said she didn't have anything she needed to say to him. She said the group chat had already said everything. I didn't push her on it. That is her call. I think about that night sometimes. The drive down I-81 in the dark, doing 75 with my hands tight on the wheel and the heater running full. The rest stop lights coming into view, walking out to that bench and seeing my daughter sitting there with a dead phone, an emergency blanket and that stillness she always has, even when she's holding everything together by the thinnest thread. I spent 31 years as an electrician. You learn in that work that the most dangerous wiring is the wiring that looks correct on the surface. The right gauge wire, the right connectors, everything neat and labelled. The problem is always in what you can't see until you open the panel. A junction that was never properly grounded, a load calculation that assumed a capacity that was never there. Verna Holloway presented correctly. Warm, organised, family-oriented, successful. Underneath, there was $310,000 of concealed debt, a fraudulent account structure, and a plan to use my daughter's pregnancy to buy time for the signatures to land. Patrick always said the same thing about the cases that took the longest to build. The evidence is always there. You just have to be willing to open the panel. He was right about that. If you are watching this and the people coming into your family feel slightly wrong in a way you can't quite name, pay attention to that. You are not imagining it. You are not being paranoid or difficult. The instinct that tells you to look more closely is the oldest and most reliable tool you have. Use it. Pay attention to the third addendum. The bomb they were testing that night on I-64 had been built over 29 years. It did not bend. Neither did we. I've been thinking lately about what actually makes a person dangerous. Not the loud kind of dangerous. Not the kind that announces itself. The kind I mean is quieter. It's the person who smiles at the right moments, asks the right questions, passes the salad and asks about the nursery colours and all the while is running a calculation in the back of their mind that you are not even aware is happening. Verna Holloway was that kind of dangerous, and the thing that keeps coming back to me sitting here a year and a half later is that she wasn't wrong to think it would work. It had worked before. Faye Drummond had signed the intimidation, the isolation, the quiet ultimatum in a parking lot. It had produced the outcome Verna wanted, and she had walked away from it without consequence. That experience didn't give her doubt. It gave her a blueprint. That's how it works, I think. When people who do wrong things keep getting away with them. They then become more cautious, they become more confident. They refine the method. They get better at presenting correctly. The warm voice, the family dinner, the language about building something together. The performance gets smoother because they've had more practice. What Verna didn't account for was Patrick, not because Patrick is exceptional, though he is, but because she had no idea he existed. She had done her inventory of what Claire had, the savings accounts, the investment funds, the leverage of a pregnancy. She had not accounted for the retired detective who came to Sunday dinners and who, when I called him at 9 o'clock on a Friday night, said, "Go get her. I'll start working," and meant it. The gap between what Verna knew and what she didn't know was the entire distance between her plan working and her company dissolving by spring. I think about Claire at that kitchen table on the fourth morning, asking me quietly if Trent had been in the group chat, the steadiness in her voice when she got the answer, the way she set the phone face down on the table and said, "Okay, what are we doing?" That moment cost her something I will probably never fully understand. But she didn't collapse. She didn't spend those weeks in grief or rage. She turned to face the next thing that needed facing. That quality, that capacity to absorb a real blow and then orient forward, is not something you're born with fully formed. Claire built it. She built it through years of being careful and deliberate, of reading things twice, of trusting the instinct that tells you something is off, even when you can't name it yet. The discipline she had put into her financial life, the patience she had practiced in her work, the quiet persistence she had applied to everything she cared about, all of it became the foundation she stood on when the worst of it landed. People who cut corners in the small things rarely hold when the large things arrive. People who build carefully, the way Claire built, tend to find that what they've constructed is sturdier than they knew. Verna built a company on concealed debt and pressure tactics, and the assumption that people who are caught off guard will stay off guard. It lasted until the first person who wasn't off guard took a close look at the panel. June is 14 months old now. She pulls herself up on the coffee table and looks extremely pleased with herself about it. Claire watches her with an expression I recognize. It's the same expression Claire has always had when she's done something she worked hard for, and it came out right. That's the thing about doing the work honestly. You don't just survive what comes at you. You come out the other side with something that belongs to you completely, that no one can fold into a trust document or take with a revised contract or leave at a rest stop on a cold March night. What you've built with your own hands and your own integrity, that part holds. It always does.